President Trump has left the G7 summit in Canada early because of the continuing crisis in the Middle East.
U.S. President Donald Trump will not be attending today's G7 meetings. In a surprise move, he departed the summit last night, citing urgent developments in the Middle East. The announcement didn't come via a press conference or even a tweet, but through a tightly worded statement from his spokesperson, Caroline Leavitt. The message dropped like a thunderclap into a summit already fraught with tension. President Trump had a successful day at the G7, including the signing of a major trade agreement with the United Kingdom. Leavitt's statement read, "However, due to urgent developments in the Middle East, he will depart this evening after dinner. No press questions, no elaboration, just a silent exit." CNN's Caitlin Collins, reporting from Canada, confirmed the abrupt decision. Trump would cut his trip short and return to Washington tonight. The sudden departure sent shockwaves through the summit's diplomatic corridors. While the official reason pointed to global conflict, insiders suggested deeper fractures were in play. Behind closed doors, world leaders were stunned. While smiles and handshakes graced the public stage, the underlying sentiment was undeniable. Trump had walked away from the table, but this time it wasn't just about economics or policy disagreements. This time it was about war. Trump's exit from the G7 summit in Alberta wasn't just unexpected, it was symbolic. He had arrived, posed for the cameras, signed a historic trade agreement with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and then vanished just as the summit's focus shifted from trade to the looming threat of global conflict. The G7 in this moment wasn't simply an economic gathering. It had effectively become a war council. The agenda was packed with high-stakes issues: Ukraine, Gaza, Iran, Syria, Russia, and one of the world's most powerful leaders had just walked away. Criticism emerged swiftly on both sides of the border. In Washington, lawmakers questioned the optics. In Ottawa, the frustration was palpable. "He's alienated nearly every one of our allies," said one Canadian lawmaker. "This is the result of a chaotic foreign policy, and it showed today." Before Trump had even landed in Canada, his confrontations with fellow G7 leaders had already begun. He'd taken aim at NATO, questioned America's commitment to Ukraine, and slammed tariffs. Yet in a move that caught many by surprise, he pivoted and signed a bilateral trade deal with the UK. "Thank you very much. We've just signed a very important document," Trump said during a brief photo op. "A little windy out here?" he joked, brushing aside the gravity of the moment. Observers were less amused. The optics were striking. A president pursuing one-on-one deals while ignoring the multilateral purpose of the summit. It looked less like diplomacy and more like dominance. But when the summit shifted to address the escalating crisis in the Middle East, specifically Iranian-backed militias, drone strikes, and growing civilian casualties, Trump didn't lead, he left. The timing couldn't have been worse. Israel had just launched retaliatory strikes in southern Lebanon. Western intelligence was bracing for potential Iranian escalation. Iranian-made drones, delivered with Russian logistical support, were striking Ukrainian targets. The lines between conflicts were blurring. Gaza and Ukraine were no longer isolated crises. They were links in a broader, converging geopolitical chain. And just as these links tightened, the U.S. president exited. Military analysts and lawmakers raised the alarm. One warned that America's absence could dangerously hinder allied coordination in the face of a potential multi-front war. Another noted the alarming lack of a coherent White House strategy to counter growing ties among Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. "We're witnessing the formation of a new axis," one senior analyst said grimly, and the President of the United States just walked out. White House aides scrambled to downplay the optics. "The president is fully equipped to manage crises remotely," one staffer insisted, but if the situation was that urgent, critics asked, why leave the very summit meant to produce a united front? In Canadian media, the tone turned sharply speculative. Was Trump pushed out? Was he avoiding confrontation? Did something happen behind closed doors? Sources close to the Canadian delegation described a tense, even humiliating exchange between Trump and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney. The dispute reportedly erupted over Trump's demand for support on a new round of airstrikes in Syria, an idea Carney flatly rejected, instead urging restraint and international coordination. After the clash, Trump was reportedly irate. He saw no value in diplomacy, one source said, only in dominance. Soon after, Canadian reporters zeroed in on a new angle. Should Trump have been allowed into Canada in the first place? Under normal immigration law, Trump's felony conviction would have barred him from entering Canadian soil without special permission. That permission had been quietly granted, but the decision was now facing backlash. Protesters gathered outside Parliament, questioning not just Trump's presence, but Canada's judgment in allowing it. Critics accused Carney of being too accommodating. Supporters defended him as a pragmatic host, but beneath it all, Canada's long-held admiration for American leadership seemed to be crumbling. The tariff threats, the walkouts, the disregard for allies, it was all building to a deeper realization. America, under Trump, was no longer acting like a friend, and Canada was no longer playing the polite neighbor. Former MP Charlie Angus put it bluntly, "This is a gangster president. He's not here for diplomacy. He's here to break things." Trump's exit wasn't merely disruptive, it was seen by many as an act of contempt, not just toward Canada, but toward the very alliances the US had once built and led. For decades, the G7 symbolized democratic unity, a bulwark against authoritarianism, but Trump's presidency had chipped away at that ideal. He'd repeatedly undermined NATO, exited key international agreements, and sowed mistrust among allies. Now, as another global conflict loomed, the US was walking away once again, in a bold move to avoid a repeat of the 2018 G7 breakdown, when Trump stormed out of Quebec, insulted Prime Minister Trudeau, and derailed the summit's closing statement. Carney made a strategic shift. He eliminated the traditional joint communique entirely. Instead, he introduced issue-specific declarations, one for climate, one for Ukraine, one for Gaza. Each could be signed independently, allowing forward movement without requiring Trump's approval. It wasn't weakness, it was containment. Carney had recognized the risk of giving Trump a veto, so he structured the summit around him, and in doing so, reframed Canada's role not just as host, but as a stabilizer in an increasingly unstable alliance. Meanwhile, Trump's Republican allies scrambled to spin the situation. "Don't pay attention to what he says," one senator pleaded. "Pay attention to what he does." But what Trump was doing, exiting a wartime summit, picking fights with allies, suggesting a return to the G8 with Russia, was more than troubling. It was revealing. The G7 used to be the G8, Trump said. Barack Obama and a person named Trudeau didn't want Russia in. That was a mistake. "I think you wouldn't have a war right now if you had Russia in." For critics, that comment struck at the heart of the matter. This wasn't just chaos, this was something more calculated, a deliberate break with global norms. After Trump's departure, speculation ran rampant. Would he propose a new G3 featuring Russia, China, and Saudi Arabia? Would he invite India? Would he abandon NATO altogether? This isn't just a realignment, one analyst warned. It's a rupture. For Canada, the implications were profound. If the US, under Trump, continued down this path, undermining alliances, flirting with autocrats, rejecting cooperation, then countries like Canada would be forced to make a choice: remain nostalgic for a past alliance, or adapt to a harsher reality. In his post-summit remarks, Carney didn't mention Trump by name. He didn't need to. "This is a moment for principled cooperation," he said, "not performative disruption." And then, with quiet resolve, he added, "We will move forward, with or without unanimity." The message was clear. Canada was done waiting, done accommodating, done mistaking chaos for leadership. Trump may have flown home, but the shadow he cast lingers. If war erupts in the Middle East and the United States finds itself seeking coalition partners, it may discover that the allies it once took for granted are no longer waiting in line. Because in diplomacy, as in war, trust is hard to earn, and even harder to reclaim.